So what I do every day is I am an executive coach for CEOs. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I work with CEOs to help them become better leaders and produce better results for their organizations. And I don't know if you've ever had a football coach, basketball coach, sporting coach, or just a coach in general. But generally speaking, I'm not sure I could run all the companies that I deal with, but I can help them get better by helping them do the right things and helping them stay on point, which is what a coach is supposed to do. If you're skiing down a hill like the Olympics that they just had, and you think about what coaches did for those people, they helped them improve by tenths of a second, just with a little better form, a little better line, and that's what a coach for CEOs does. Also, I have what are executive peer groups, much like what you have here at the High Center. And what I do is meet with CEOs and we talk about issues, decisions, and opportunities that they have in a peer group setting where it's safe for them to talk about things that they might not want to talk about with their wives, their family. And we bring up all sorts of issues that impact CEOs and their companies on a variety of different topics. Some are personal, some are professional. I also do internal leadership programs for companies where I go into a company and help them improve the leaders up and down the team. Most of you, if you're interested in business, may want to become a leader at some point in time. I hope you do. I hope today I can get you interested a little bit in that, which I think would be something great for you to think about. I'm if you think about it this way, with the peer groups that I do and the CEOs that I work with, I'm in between 60 and 70 different companies every week, every month. And it's like going to Harvard Business School, where I get to see internally, intimately, the operations of companies. And it's been extremely helpful to me. I've been doing it for 15 years, so I've learned quite a bit about that. The last thing that I do, I do two other things. One is I have an event. It's going to come up at Spooky Nook this year. It's going to be on customer service. And I'm going to bring the folks from Zappos in and talk about their level of customer service. I don't know if you've ever heard about Zappos. They're really cool. If you've never read the Happiness book that Tony Hsieh wrote, Tony Hsieh, when he was your age, found a company that they sold to Microsoft for $125 million. And then he started Zappos. And he burned through all $125 million trying to get Zappos started. But he was your age when he started the first company, a little bit older when he found Zappos. And Zappos got sold to Amazon a while ago, but Tony still continues to run the company in a way that has a unique and different culture. Actually, if you haven't thought about it, they bought the entire downtown area of old Las Vegas, and that's where they have their campus now. It's not where all the glitz is. They bought the old town there. It's kind of a cool thing if you think about it. So they're coming along with people from Southwest Airlines. And then the last thing I do is some strategic planning for a variety of companies in the region here. But today what I wanted to talk about, and you can ask questions because I think there are going to be some terms that you may or may not know about, so that's okay. So here's a rule. I hope we can live with this, all right? I may ask you a question. I'll pick somebody out. Don't feel put upon because what I want to do is facilitate a conversation that might be helpful to you at some point. And I'm going to talk about how companies scale up today and think about how they grow and get bigger. It seems like it's easy. It's not. Lots of things can go wrong. And I'll tell you about my own experience because I think it's something you'd find interesting. And certainly, maybe today, I don't know, does anybody listen to the radio in this room? Anybody ever listen to radio? Yes, okay. I still think that radio reaches about 90% of the people in the United States. Certainly in one form or another. I listen less to the regular commercial broadcast. I listen to satellite radio or a variety of stuff that I do, so it's changed a lot in the past 20 years. I haven't been in a radio station in probably 20 years, so it tells you how long it's been. Background was owned and operated radio stations here in Harrisburg up to Albany, New York, and I'll talk about this in a second, over to Rome, Utica, down to Hagerstown, Chambersburg area, State College, variety of places where I owned and operated radio stations, and built that group into a fairly large group that we sold. I'm going to tell you the story behind that because it wasn't all fun and games. It was kind of rough and tumble at times. And the regulatory environment changed, and has made a big difference. So let me tell you, here's the story. In the beginning, it started with radio. I went to Penn State, got a degree in marketing. When I graduated from Penn State, marketing was in the journalism department. The guys who were the professors that I had at Penn State hated marketing. They thought it was evil. They thought that advertising was evil. These were journalists. They wanted to be journalism guys. They thought it was really terrible. So when I got my degree and I went into radio sales, I went to work in Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and Houston. And in Houston, I was working for ABC at their owned and operated radio stations there. And my dad called me. My dad had been in the broadcasting business up in State College, and they bought a radio station in Harrisburg. I'd never lived in Harrisburg, and asked me to come back and run that. So that's kind of where I'm going to begin this story. And I want you to think about things that are impacting when this story began. So the story begins in 1982. That's not when I first got into the business, but that's when I came to the Harrisburg area. Jimmy Carter was the President of the United States. You guys probably remember Jimmy Carter. And my dad and I had recently purchased 2 radio stations. There was an AM radio station in Harrisburg, and in 1982, AM radio was still a dominant force, believe it or not. I mean, today, mainly you get sports and talk and stuff like that. We had a music station that was #1 in Harrisburg in 1982, a lower power AM radio station. Also, we had an FM station in York, 92.7. It's now a sports station owned by Hall Communications, which is in Lancaster. And at that time, it was underground album rock. I'll tell you a story. You guys will appreciate this story. So when I first came to the album rock station when we bought it, and I'm trying to think, it was around 1982, something like that. The company that owned it was a little company, and the radio station, if you drive up 83 from York toward Harrisburg, you can see a tower up on the mountain. That's where the radio station was. And what they were doing is underground album rock. What they were doing up there was they were sending coded signals, the former employees, before we got there, to people, and made drug deals out of the radio station at night. Really nice, huh? So when I came in, we had to eliminate those people from working at the radio station. What they didn't know was the guy who lived next door to them was the chief of police for Conewago Township, and so he kept the eyes on things for me. When people showed up there at 11 o'clock at night, he kind of enforced the law up there, but it's a unique thing. FM was not as dominant as it is today in 1982, and around this time, 2 things happened, okay? First of all, many of you have probably heard of Wink 104 in Harrisburg. Wink 104 came to the market in about 1982, and they were 50,000 watt FM radio station competing with our 1,000 watt AM radio station. And it was like the New York Yankees bidding against the Minnesota Twins. It was not good. And almost immediately our business went from, and if you have questions about what this means, I'm happy to answer it, but went from like $5 million in revenue on the radio station to $2 million. So we lost more than half of our revenue in about a year or less. They also took and rated the talent that we had. So they took our morning disc jockeys, our news director, business manager, salespeople, anybody they could grab a hold of, they took, and I was left with not much at that point in time. Our #1 client, you guys don't remember this client, but they were around for a long time. Hill's Department Stores, been replaced by other stores like Walmart and stuff like that. Hill's was the largest retailer in the region at that point in time, and our largest customer, and in December of 1982, I got a call from them and they canceled their advertising. So anybody know what's happening right now with interest rates? Have you guys followed that? Looking at business interest rates, it impacts, if you buy a car, you're going to pay more, Anybody knows what's happening right now? This week there was another change. Pay attention to this. It will make, yeah, you know what? There's a hike. And it's not gone up a lot. For the past 10 years, Jeremy, we've almost been at 0 interest rates, right? So borrowing money has been really easy for companies. 0 interest rates. In 1982, Jimmy Carter's president of the United States, inflation, which, look that up, was running crazy in the country. And our note on what we borrowed, millions of dollars to own the radio stations, went from, let's say, 4 or 5%, which is high for right now, to 22%. So just think about if you had a home, if you have a car, if you have a student loan, which they can't do, but if your student loan went from the 1 or 2%, whatever you're paying, or it to 22%, it is kind of like the usury rates that they have on your credit card. You know, it's just terrible. So we went, the amount that we paid went up significantly, and what happened was this competition that came in, the economic conditions, we ended up in what was the workout department of Hamilton Bank at that point in time. Now, I don't know if you know, anybody know what the workout department is? So what they do is they put businesses, when you can't pay your bills, into special, what they call it now is special assets. And so when you can't pay your bills, we couldn't pay the interest or the principal, we ended up in the special assets department of the bank. It's not a great place, I can promise you that. I had to call people if I wanted to spend, at Hamilton Bank, if I wanted to spend any money. I had to work with them to kind of make things go forward. I had to put on my phone, nothing happens till you make a sale, and collect the money. And we were in that workout department for over 2 years, 2.5 years. During that time period, what we did is we said we can't let this be the kind of end all for us. In other words, we're not going to make it with an AM radio station here in Harrisburg. We have to change our strategy. So what we did is we said what we're going to do is we're going to look to buy radio stations in secondary markets, and we're going to buy properties that have great signals, you know, because the stronger the signal is, the more chance you're going to listen to a radio station. You don't want the ones that disappear right away. So we ended up developing a strategy that included buying radio stations in secondary markets with big FMs and big AMs, and bought them and started to do that. So we ended up buying radio stations in Johnstown, Williamsport, Albany, Rome, Utica, Harrisburg, Chambersburg, Hagerstown State College, and we found banks and angel investors willing to kind of help us buy what we did. So if you ever want to start a company, which I'm hoping somebody does here someday, I hope you get excited about doing this. Someday you're going to have to figure out how to find money to run your company. Banks are the nicest because they really aren't, they're not as tough sometimes as private investors are. But you know, finding blends of private investors and banks worked for us. And what we did is we kept buying up in terms of radio stations until we got to a point where we could use the equity that we had and leverage that to buy other radio stations. So it all worked out great. During that time period, and you can see this today, so you guys familiar with Iheart Media? Know who they are? Just had their Iheart major thing on TV where they had all the artists and stuff like that. Iheart Media bought our company. They paid an incredible amount for what we did. Unfortunately, what they did is they overpaid for everybody else, including us. So when you pay too much for something, you have to do things like cut back on expenses. So they cut back on live DJs, they cut back on newscasts, they cut back on a variety of things, and they've done a good job operating. But this past week, Iheart Media, I don't know if you saw it, filed for bankruptcy. They're the largest, so the regulatory environment changed in the broadcasting business. When I started out, you could only own 7 AMs, 7 FMs, and 7 TV stations. That was it, period. The biggest ABC, CBS, NBC, biggest networks, everybody only owns 7 TV stations or 7 radio stations, AM or FM. So it's quite a change today. Clear Channel or Iheart Media owns probably 1,500 radio stations today. So the music that you hear on many radio stations, the second largest group is Cumulus. They're also in town. They're the people that own Wink 104 and a variety of other stations, WSBA in York. They also filed for bankruptcy. They overpaid for their stations too. And now this is 15 years later. So trying to catch up with cash flow, very tough thing to do, guys, if you're thinking about it. So, these are big, smart people with lots of MBAs that do great pivot tables and everything else, but they have not been able to solve that problem yet. It's a big deal when you go bankrupt because, I mean, I don't know what you think about, but would you like to work for a company that has declared bankruptcy? I'm not thinking you would. And I'm sure they'll lose some people through the process to go on here. So the last purchase we made was in Harrisburg, and what the FCC decided that we could do was they looked at the competitive environment and they said, instead of owning just 1 or 2 stations in every market, which is what it was, so radio was pretty much a mom and pop business. Television was not that different. Mom and pop owned those. Now it's big companies. We were able to buy 3 more radio stations in Harrisburg. We bought WHP AM and FM. So we bought WHP The River, Bob 94.9, WCMB KISS 99. And what happened was, these are all bumps that you can run into when you do stuff. So I'm sitting at my desk, and what happened was that I got a letter or a call from the Department of Justice, the ones you hear about right now in all the news. And one of our competitors, a local weekly newspaper that's terrible, was the Paxton Herald. It's a weekly rag, filed an antitrust claim against us. And so what happened was the Department of Justice called me up. This is what can happen. It's terrible. We were a highly regulated business. They called up and they said, whoops, you can't finish this acquisition. You can't finish the sale, buying these radio stations until we determine if you are competing unfairly with all the other people. What the newspaper said was that because we had such a concentration of media power that we were able to fix rates and that we were able to dictate what people paid in the market for advertising. And so we had to put the acquisition on hold for about 18 or 20 months. And what we did was we fought a legal battle. The Department of Justice pulled a tractor trailer up to our business, I couldn't say no, took every computer hard drive in the company, took every document. They made us make a copy of every document. They paid junior attorneys to glean every document. I spent 3 days at the federal building on a witness stand being deposed by a variety of creepy attorneys who tried to get me to say that we were fixing rates and that we were doing all this kind of stuff. And we spent, as a company, about $350,000 in legal fees. And all that ended was one day the Department of Justice called me like on a Thursday afternoon and said, we can't find anything, you're good to go. And that was it. $350,000, 18 months later, not good. So we made the purchase and it worked out perfectly well, but there are things that can happen when you try and buy a business. There are things that can happen as you go forward that make it very difficult to be able to do it. As I said, Clear Channel bought everything from us then a few years later when they were making their big play, and they bought all of the markets from us. They bought them all. And the reason this is important for me to just start the conversation with is because it's bumpy. When you start a business and when you're running a business, it seems like everything is good to go. I mean, if you think right now, look at Facebook this week, right? I'm sure I don't know if you guys use Facebook or not, but you got Zuckerberg hiding out because he doesn't want to talk to the governments. They're going to put him on a witness stand, and he's now said we made a mistake. And social media may change as a result of this, But if any of you think that all of the social media that you use, whether it's Instagram or anything, I don't know, Snapchat, whatever you're using, doesn't steal everything from you right now, they do. They know everything about you, and they're probably selling it to somebody. I would assume that and not believe anything else. I'm a skeptic when it comes to that kind of stuff, but I just think that you have to be aware and understand that that's what happens. So what I thought I would do is tell you some more stories. I don't know, anybody have any thoughts on Zuckerberg, by the way, what's going on there? Do you think it was good or bad, what he did? Because, you know, basically they have that company over in England that they said stole people's backgrounds to be able to look for information to help with Trump's election campaign, right? That's what they said. What do you guys think about that? That's a business decision, right? Any thoughts? Come on. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll pick somebody else, but what do you think, John?
Well, whether or not it was right of them to sell the information, I don't think the market really liked his apology.
Yeah.
The stock dropped, like something like the market cap.
Yeah, they lost about,
Fortune 500 company.
yeah, they lost, I think it was something like $15 billion, some large number of their stock valuation yesterday. So think about that. You're the CEO of a company, which all you would like to probably, if you want to be in business, want to run a big company, you have a problem, you hide for 3 days, then you come out and have an apology. And the only reason I bring it up is I think these are things that impact every business. I have working with me a PR firm in the event that something happens to myself or one of my clients, that I can go to them. They're a special firm. They're the firm that handled, which you probably don't know, that you don't think, maybe don't think they handled it well. They handled the board of trustees at Penn State when they did the dismissal of Joe Paterno. And so think about that for a second, okay? That's really a harsh moment. You have a guy who's an icon, he's dying. You fire him in the midst of some terrible event that's going on. And this firm that I work with, because you know you need to have a firm working with you that can handle events like that. It's really a terrible thing if you have to deal with it. So, but past couple years, so the clients that I've worked with, I have, as I say, 60 or 70 people. About 14 of them, so I have new clients that have come in. 14 people that I work with have sold their companies in the past couple of years. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for you, if you'd like to own a company at some point in time, to buy over the next couple of years, because the boomers are getting old, right? And what's happening is that as they get older, companies that they have, if they haven't thought of transition, are going to be for sale, and you're going to be able to buy them. And I think there are going to be more companies for sale than ever before in the next few years. So I would think about that, you know, if you want to get involved in it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about things that you need to do to scale your company. So if you think about this, in companies today, and maybe you've heard about this in some of your classes, there's a lot of emphasis on client relation management systems, ERP systems, Six Sigma, Lean, all those kind of things that are processes that bring efficiency to your organization. Do you have a Lean class that you've done? Are you familiar with that at all? Yeah. So you have all this stuff that you do. All these things are there to promote efficiency, to make companies go better. So here's a question for you. After all of that, after all of the thought, I'm sure you've heard about people want to be engaged in the work that they do, right? What percentage of people do you think are actually engaged in their work? What do you think? Yeah. 20%. 20%? You're close. Any other thoughts? You know what engagement means? That means emotionally connected to the job, willing to go above and beyond the call of duty for that company. For the past 40 years, it's been 30% or less. Hasn't changed. Think about that. This is a Gallup poll, quoted frequently, that only 30% of that means 70% of the people that you would go to work with are not engaged. That means, I call them 501. 501 they leave. 501 they depart from their job. They're not connected, they do an okay job, but they're not connected with the organization. It's a paycheck for them. There's no kind of emotional connection with them. So I grew up in a world that I call Leadership 1.0. This is not what any of you want, I promise you right now. Unless you tell me, I'll be surprised. I grew up in a command and control environment. Rewards and consequences. You work hard, you get paid. You don't work hard, you get fired. Kind of simple like that, right? That's not the world that people are looking at today, okay? Also, in this world that I grew up in, unlike today, so I'm going to give you a number, okay? I want you to think about this number. Anybody know what 4.1 means right now? Any thoughts? 4.1. Guess. 4.1 is the current unemployment rate. Think about this. If you're running a company today, the number one thing impacting organizations today is finding, retaining, keeping great talent in place. At almost full employment, where I grew up, if I got fired, there was somebody else who wanted the job more than I did, and you could replace it. That's the way the business world was at that point in time. Today, you have many choices. Let me ask you this question. Do you want to go to work for a place that you don't want to go to work for? How long would you work there? How long would you work there?
A year.
A year maybe, right? How long would you work there, Andrew?
A year, probably.
Maybe. Short, right? Wouldn't be long. You go to work, I don't like it every day. You have choices, right? Regardless of your skill sets. I think this is a great place for you as potential employees. At the same time, it's very difficult for companies to deal with. So what's happened today is we've gone to what I call Leadership 2.0. This is where you have a charismatic leader. Somebody who is really good. They're very communicative. They rally you behind a vision. They have a big vision for a company. They can make you feel like it's something really important that you're working for. They are still, though, more of a disciplinarian than a trusted colleague. So if you have I'll go there in a second. They also rule on hierarchy. And I think I wanted to talk just a little bit here about where I think we're going very shortly, and this is where you, I believe, would like. Now, you tell me if I'm wrong, but this is transformational. This is team-focused. A leader is not telling you what to do, when to do it, where to do it. They would be more collaborative in nature. They see their role as the lead facilitator versus somebody who is a dictator. Now, you know why people think this way. There's neuroscience. If you've not studied any neuroscience in your classes, I'm going to suggest you look at it. It's a word you will run into in every business environment coming up. And the neuroscience behind leadership is this. Primary human needs, humans need to connect and belong. And we want to feel like we're part of something that is different and can make a big difference. And my thought is that most of you would probably like to go someplace, even school here, where even in college, where you feel connected, you belong. As a matter of fact, if we look to, this is not a very flattering part of human nature, but human beings are herd animals, and we find it's in our DNA to be connected, safe. We want to get together. We want to feel in a safe environment. And when you think about what American business has done in the past 30 years, CEO gets paid to do what? Make money? Is that what you think? Make money? Most of the time. A lot of times they've been paid recently, if the economy goes down, they get paid billions of dollars or millions of dollars to fire a bunch of people. They sometimes make 1,000 times more what the line person does, the average person in a company makes. I don't know about you, and this sounds like a little bit of a socialistic idea. It seems unfair to me for somebody to make $1,000 more or 1,000 times what you make just because they're the CEO of the company. So I think that in our DNA, we want to go to some place where we feel safe. Feeling like you might be fired is not really a safe place. Feeling like your boss is not really a good person. If you haven't read online today, there was an article in the, and I don't know how much of you have followed the Me Too stuff, right? But there's an article in the Harrisburg Patriot today. If you just go to their Penn Live section, one of the local broadcast female anchors from Channel 27, a woman named Flora Pastorera, was let go. And when you read the things that her boss was supposed to have said to her, it is like unfrickin' believable that he actually said those things. And I can promise you that he's not going to be around very long. He will not be along. I mean, the company can't afford to deal with this. She's going to make a bundle of money. She has filed a lawsuit against them right now. And in the environment, we've reached a tipping point for companies where, you can't act and behave that way anymore. I had a guy who I worked with, the PR guy told me not to tell the story. I'll tell it to you, okay, because it's a bad story. When I was in college, I had a general manager at a radio station that my dad owned, but my dad was not there. He was in Harrisburg, and I was finishing up Penn State. This guy, I actually saw him chase a young woman who was a administrative worker into a closet. She's screaming. I don't know what he did. She comes out crying, and that was one thing. He showed naked pictures of women on the wall. He did a bunch of stuff that was incredible over the years, had many lawsuits filed against him. And because he had a persona in State College, this was up in State College, he was able to beat every circumstance, or they paid off the people. And I'm not a big advocate for paying off somebody. I think it needs to go to court and determine whether somebody was right or wrong. And if it clogs up the court system, so be it. But I'm going to tell you right now that some things that you think might be okay are not okay. And I would never be okay doing something that's wrong or demeans another human being. You can't work in an organization and feel safe and have things where you want to connect and belong. So people are looking for social nutrients. We're social. We want to connect with people. We want to go forward. And we want to develop an ecosystem where we are that's different if you work at a company that's great. And this is how you can build engagement in an organization through leadership, which is a lot different. So you want to have this ecosystem. People want to go to work where it's predictable. One quick, very visible thing that happened, and you can think about this, they're not much older than you, okay? So this past year, the president kind of was yelling about people kneeling during the national anthem and stuff like that. And whether or not you are on either side of the issue isn't what I'm suggesting here. But I am suggesting that you have a bunch of kids who are between 20 and 25 for the most part. I mean, the average stay in the NFL is what, 4 or 5 years at the most before you get too injured to be able to do it. And a lot of people don't stay. Some people stay longer, but that's the exception. And what happens is when you don't have predictability, when the President of the United States says that you should be fired because of doing something, you act out. And so that's why all those guys and other people acted out, and it happens in business all the time. I have a company that had things changed. They were sold a couple years ago, and what happened was they had a new owner, and all the promises that the new owner made, they didn't keep. They changed the insurance, policy that they had. They changed the wages that they had. They changed the hours. All these things that were predictable kind of caused the company to fall into a bit of a spiral, and it didn't work out. So I just think that that's one key ingredient that you have to think about. You have to be predictable in your business. You have to have meaning and purpose, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. You also have to have validation, clarity and safety. So clarity and safety, I think, is something where people need to understand what their job is. They need to have, feel really safe at what they do, And I just think that this is really important. I did want to just talk briefly about validation and recognition. And many of you say, well, maybe I don't need that. Or I'm going to tell you that most human beings do need to be validated or recognized as people. And if you don't do this, you're not going to be running a very good company. If you're leading a company, these are things that I think that you can do to make a difference. So I'm going to ask a question. When I do strategic planning, I'm going to ask somebody over here today, okay? So I'll ask one of you two guys, okay? When I go into strategic planning, I say, how do you know when you're doing a good job? And what do people tell me over and over again? You know? What do you think? How would you know, do you have a job right now? Do you work? No? So if you had a job, how would you know you're doing a good job?
If my actions are following through and I'm making money.
So you're following through, you're making money, you're interestingly enough, that's not what people told me, although that's a good answer. I think it's a really good answer. The answer that people tell me is, I know I'm doing a good job, and the only way I know is the absence of being yelled at. In other words, people don't give anybody any feedback. They don't give them any recognition. They don't tell them anything. And so people go, I don't know. I think I'm doing a good job. Nobody's yelling at me. And, you know, what the heck kind of job is that, right? You know, and then somebody comes up behind you and says, no, you're not doing a good job. Then you're surprised. You know, so that should never happen. That's not fair. And then the last thing here is constructive feedback, which I just kind of mentioned. And I do think that today people are looking for coaches versus managers. They want people to facilitate a conversation. And interestingly enough, most of the CEOs that I work with are totally paranoid about coaching people and telling them that they're not doing a good job. Because one is they don't have anybody they can hire. If it's a really good person, and you know, here's the number one issue that impacts big organizations. They have somebody who's really good at their job, who's a total jerk, who leaves dead bodies behind them, who doesn't do a good job, who doesn't follow the culture of the organization, but they produce good results. So what would you do with that person if they're in your company? What do you think? What do you think? What would you do? Somebody's in your company, they do a good job, but they don't follow your cultural norms.
I think either you could have like a training to like show them like better ways of managing, or find someone that could like assist them to make them do that.
Right. So she's suggesting that you have a training session and help them get better, right? Kind of work through that. My experience has been that really hard to do that. I think it's the right idea, and I would do that up front. First of all, I would tell people what the behavior, because we can only observe behaviors. And so I'd talk to them about the behaviors and see what you can do to get them to change a behavior, agree to what that behavior is, and work through that. But otherwise, I'm going to tell you, if somebody is dysfunctional or toxic, it impacts a tremendous amount of people in your organization. Got a company that is a roofing company that I work with, and they have offices in Philadelphia. They had a guy in Philadelphia who was their kind of, I would call him a controller, you know, a financial guy. And unbeknownst to the owners of the company, women in the company would say this guy creeped them out because he would walk behind them and stare at them. He would follow them around, you know, all weird things. And he would say stuff to all people that was very negative. And they didn't know that. He did an adequate job. They started asking people, and they asked him to stop his behavior. And then finally they got one other complaint because they were trying to coach him up, like you suggested. They sent him home, and then they fired him after that. He's a 26-year employee. They let that go on for 26 years, and it happened an incredible amount of time because they never asked the right kind of question. So I would think about that. So we have just a few minutes here. I'm going to modify and go forward. So individuals get their first leadership position at what age, do you think? 26. Most people get a leadership job around 25, 26. You know when they get their first leadership training? When they're 42. The rest of the time it's on the job, right? Go on the job, somebody there's going to try and help you be better. Today companies need to have leadership programs. When you go to a company First of all, let me ask you this question. This is a question for younger people. I would not have done this, but I will tell you that many times, if you had a chance to take a little bit less money and have a program that would develop you to be better at your job and have a better future within the company and just take a little bit money, what would your choice be? What do you think? What would you do? Take more money or a little bit less money and have a development program?
I'll take a little bit less money.
Take a little bit less money? What about you?
Yeah, take a little bit less.
What about you? More money, less money? I'm going to tell you that the research that's been done says that you, all of you in this room, would be happier with a little bit less money and a program that helps you grow and learn and is focused on that. And so as you're looking at companies, it's something that would be, I think, a really good thing to do. I'm going to just do one more thing and then we'll finish up here. The next, so I'm sure you've heard CEOs say this, like, people are our greatest asset. They don't act this way. They don't treat you like that, and they don't act this way, and they need to act this way. So this is really a big thing, you know, when you think about it. I mean, in the most recent Wall Street Journal, I've already mentioned this, American business, hiring, onboarding, developing and retaining and growing talent is very tough to do. I have two companies I'll just tell you a quick story about. One's in the agriculture business. They have a very large business up and down the East Coast. They have a warehouse and where they package goods for market that they sell to giant stores, Walmart, every major grocery chain up and down the East Coast. You know what their turnover rate is in their warehouse right now? You know what a turnover rate is? How fast your employees turn over? You know what their rate is? 40%. 40% of the people working there today won't be there at the end of this year. They have to replace that number of people. You know how many people that is for them? They have about 500 people on the floor. It's 200 people that they need to find this year. Yikes, right? I have another company that is a service company that has people that are service-oriented. Their rate is about 40% also. Both of them have similar issues. The agricultural-oriented company this year wanted to hire, this May, wanted to hire 90 people. They had 100 people show up for jobs. You know how many they were able to hire? 0. You know why they couldn't hire them? Nobody could pass a drug test, not one. Think about that. Can't operate heavy equipment, can't go out, you know, whether it's alcohol, pot, whatever it is. I think it's kind of unfair about the pot thing because it stays in your system a lot longer than alcohol does. And, you know, somebody can go drink this weekend and come back in on Monday and pass the drug test where you can't do that with marijuana. But still, it's still illegal as a federal crime right now, whether you agree or disagree with that. And the last thing I've had people, I met with a guy yesterday, and I'll just finish with this story and answer any questions that you have. This guy is about 41, and he had a really large company in Lancaster, and he sold it about 5 years ago. And one of the reasons that he sold the company, and you talk about things that can impact you from a cultural standpoint, impact your entire company, he had a guy who was his chief mechanic. They had a part of the business was trucking and a variety of other things that they did. And the guy was working on his own car, which was against company rules, during the day in the garage on a jack that wasn't backed up. And the jack fell on his head and killed him in front of all of the people in the company. And this guy, to this day, 5 years later, I talked to him yesterday at lunch, still can't get over that. He's seeing a therapist right now because of that. And you think that CEOs, I have another company, and maybe you heard this story. I work with Pensy Supply. I'll give you their name because they, you know, you would recognize. They had a guy this summer or this spring, last fall, that was driving a backhoe up near on the turnpike where the tunnels are, and he backed across the road at the wrong spot at the wrong time. Bunch of kids driving a car 80 miles an hour ran into him, killed him, didn't kill all of them. But those things are things that can impact your business. So, there are just a lot of things. I do think that you need to have purpose in a company. And I'll just tell you one last story and then we'll be done. Take a question, okay? So a guy was selling valves, CEO of a valve company, came into a room like this. And what he did was he said, and the pictures like up here of the valves, which is not a very sexy business. I will tell you that right now. New valves. Lights go down. The CEO says, this morning at 6 o'clock, janitor walked into the basement of a school in Vermont and turned 10 of our valves so that the kids could have a great place, safe place to be warm and go to school. At 9 o'clock this morning in Minneapolis, they're going to turn 120 of our valves in an operating room, and we'll save 3 lives today. And you think our company just sells valves. And I think when you look at defining purpose in what you do in an organization, it makes an incredible difference. People want to go to work for companies like that. Probably you do too. Making money is one thing, but in the list of things that people want to do, number one is not making money. I mean, it might seem that way today, but usually it's not. The 3 things that motivate people are going to be mastery, which we've talked about, kind of self-directedness. You don't want anybody leading over top of you, and finding purpose in what you do. So with that, I thank you for your time. I'll take questions. If you have questions about the radio business or anything that I talked about, I'll be happy to do that. Anybody want to be in business here? Want to own a company? What's your interest?
Something with health and fitness.
With what?
Health and fitness.
Health and fitness? And what makes you want to do that?
So my junior year of high school, I weighed 220 pounds, and I lost 55 pounds over the course of 2 years. Just motivated.
So you're on a mission.
Yeah.
If you want to get this video clip, it's really a good one. Do you ever watch Blues Brothers, with Jake and Elwood Blues? And they're in the church and they feel like they're on a mission from God when they're going to get that money for those kids in that thing, and they do backflips in the church. That's what you sound like to me, okay? Doing something like that. It can give you some greater purpose, to do what you're doing. Anybody else want to be in business at all? Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure yet, but something with like all natural products.
Like what?
All natural products.
All natural products. Yeah, sustainability, kind of understanding how to do those kind of things is only going to get bigger and bigger. If you look online, you can find a whole bunch of people who have been involved in products like that, who have started a business from next to nothing and really built something up. And so I would encourage you to follow, whatever you think you might like to do. I just think that there's a lot that you need to do to kind of get there to make it really sustainable. What else? Anybody else interested in? What do you guys want to do? Don't know. What do you want to do?
I want to do the military after college.
That's great. They have a lot of jobs, and many of them will prepare you to be in business at some point in time. So that's really a good thing. What do you want to do?
I'll be a corporate lawyer.
Corporate lawyer? And do you want to be a litigator?
Not so much.
Not so much. So you want to do M&A work, stuff like that? I would get a mentor right now. There are plenty of them here. I know a bunch that would be happy to talk to you. I made fun of lawyers, but my son and daughter-in-law are both attorneys. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for them. You need them all the time, but yeah. What about you?
I'll work with some international business.
Somewhat?
International business.
International? Yeah. Overseas business? Certainly. You want to go there? Do something like that, or just?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I just encourage you to kind of, I am a business geek. I hope you can tell. I love thinking about it, doing it. And I would just encourage you to think about, you have such a great thing with the High Business Center here that you can see things that you'd never see and participate in stuff that you wouldn't know otherwise. And I just think it's a pretty fantastic thing. So I would encourage you to look at business, think a little bit differently about it. And there are not all evil people in business. Most of the CEOs and people that I know are kind of the backbone of communities. They're the people who pay for the little league teams and, you know, kind of stand out and do a good job and really care about their people and agonize over every person they have to fire or if they have a downturn in the business, etc. So I really want to thank you for your time. You've been very diligent. I appreciate it. Thanks.